The movie begins with Andy outside, fixing his car mirror. Suddenly, he hears his blind sister, Piper, calling out in panic. Their dad isn't answering from the bathroom. Andy rushes in, breaks down the door, and finds his father dead on the floor, like he collapsed without warning. Andy stands there, frozen in shock. The next day, a social worker named Wendy shows up to speak with Piper. Since she's still a minor, Wendy explains she'll be placed with a foster mother named Laura, a former therapist known for being kind. Wendy then talks to Andy, telling him he'll be sent to a separate care facility, but Andy refuses. He insists on staying with Piper, saying he's always taken care of her and plans to file for custody when he turns 18, in just 3 months. Wendy is clearly moved, and finally agrees to let them both stay together under Laura's care. The next morning, Andy and Piper moved into their new home. Laura greeted them with over-the-top excitement, especially toward Piper. She even suggested they take a family photo, but while posing, she subtly blocked Andy's face with her head. Andy noticed a strip of tape on the floor and assumed it was to help Piper, but Laura explained it was actually for her blind daughter, Kathy. When Andy asked if Kathy lived there, Laura quietly said Kathy had drowned in the pool. Just then, Laura got a call from Wendy and stepped away. Andy and Piper took the chance to explore the backyard, but accidentally let the house cat slip outside. Andy chased after it, only to see something strange. A small child sitting at the bottom of the empty pool, holding the cat tightly. Laura quickly rushed to the pool, grabbed the cat from the child's hands, and walked away. The kid just stood there, silently staring at Andy and Piper with an eerie look. Laura explained his name was Oliver, another child living with them. She said he'd lost his whole family too, and ever since Kathy died, he hadn't spoken a single word. Later, Piper asked Andy what Oliver looked like. Not wanting to scare her, Andy lied, saying Oliver seemed sweet and smiled a lot. But when she asked about his hair color, Andy hesitated. Before he could answer, Laura jumped in and said Oliver had red, curly hair. A bit later, Andy went outside to grab something from the car and noticed something strange. A white circle drawn on the ground, completely surrounding the house. It looked odd but not dangerous, so he ignored it. Inside, Laura was showing Piper her new room, then told Andy his would be right next to hers. But when Andy walked in, he found the room unusually small, narrow, and the door didn't even close properly. Feeling unsettled, he tried to shake it off by lifting weights and clearing his head. Meanwhile, Piper was settling into her room, unaware that Laura was standing silently outside her door, watching her with a faint smile that felt more creepy than kind. Later that night, Laura sat in front of the TV, watching an old video of a strange, magical ritual. She studied it closely, almost like she was memorizing it. That same night, Andy looked out his window and saw something odd. Laura was heading to the garden shed, with Oliver beside her. They both went inside and shut the door. The next morning, Laura walked to the backyard and drew a small white line on the wall of the empty pool. Then she tilted her head to the sky, standing silently, as if in a trance. Soon after, Andy woke up in a panic. He had wet the bed. Embarrassed, he quickly gathered his clothes and quietly threw them into the washing machine. Later that day, Laura locked Oliver in his room, then took Andy and Piper with her to attend their father's funeral. After the funeral, Laura told them not to be sad. Funerals, she said, should be a celebration of life. Then she turned to Andy and asked what he usually does for fun. Annoyed, Andy replied sarcastically, "We drink, we play music, and we dance." To his surprise, Laura loved the idea and suggested they actually do it that night. So the three of them spent the evening drinking, playing games, and dancing around the house. It felt joyful on the surface, but underneath, something about it was just off. By the end of the night, Piper was exhausted and fell asleep on the spot. Andy stayed up a bit longer. Feeling slightly grateful, he thanked Laura for helping them through the day. Then he gently asked how she dealt with losing her daughter, Kathy. Laura opened up. She said that during the burial, it felt like she was abandoning her, and that she'd spent entire days just sitting by Kathy's grave. Then, with her voice shaking, she added, "I would do anything, just to hear her call me Mom one more time." That night, at exactly midnight, Laura did something deeply disturbing. She urinated into a cup and poured it onto Andy's pants while he was asleep, trying to make him believe he'd wet himself again. It turns out she had been secretly drugging him all along by slipping sedatives into his protein powder. She even unlocked his phone without him knowing and deleted every photo he had taken of Oliver, as if she was trying to erase any trace of him. Suddenly, Laura heard the cat screaming in the garden. She looked outside and saw Oliver holding it tightly. She calmly brought him into the bathroom, sat in front of him, and whispered, "I know you're hungry, but now's not the time to eat." Then she stared deep into his eyes and asked softly, "You're in there. I feel it, right?" Oliver didn't move, just stared back, completely still. Then, the hot water faucet behind Laura turned on by itself, and in that moment, Oliver's eyes changed, glowing deep red. From within him came a chilling, demonic voice that said, "Yes." The next morning, Andy woke up to find he'd wet the bed again. He felt embarrassed and confused. He had no idea what was happening to him. He rushed toward the bathroom, but in the hallway, he ran into Laura. With her usual fake kindness, she offered to take his dirty clothes to the laundry. Just then, Piper walked in. Excited, Laura had promised to take her shopping. While holding Andy's clothes, Laura lifted them to her face, sniffed them, and asked in a cold, emotionless voice, "You wet yourself?" Andy looked away, embarrassed, and said, "I don't know. I don't understand what's happening." Laura calmly replied, "It's okay, but you should take a shower." At that moment, Andy was washing himself using the outdoor faucet. He still couldn't bring himself to use the indoor shower. It reminded him too much of his father's death. Just thinking about it filled him with fear and discomfort. While rinsing off, he noticed Oliver standing behind his bedroom window, both hands raised. At first, Andy thought he was waving hello, so he smiled and waved back. But then he realized something disturbing. Oliver wasn't waving. He was pressing a fly against the glass and eating it. Unnerved, Andy went to check on him, but the door was locked. He grabbed a knife, popped the lock open, and found Oliver inside. Quietly, Andy led him to the kitchen. They sat together, and Andy tried to break the silence with a few simple questions, but Oliver didn't react. Andy gently handed him a notebook and pen, saying, "I'll get you something to eat, but you have to write something, anything." Oliver took the notebook and scribbled something down. To encourage him, Andy offered a slice of cantaloupe, skewered on the tip of a knife. Oliver took the knife, ate some of the fruit, but then did something terrifying. He started biting the actual blade, like he was trying to eat the metal. Andy, shocked, quickly pulled the knife away, his face full of panic and confusion. Andy decided to get Oliver out of the house, maybe take him to a hospital, or just get help. But as soon as Oliver stepped near the white circle on the ground, he screamed. His body convulsed violently, like something inside him was tearing apart. And then, Andy heard it, a faint, broken whisper from Oliver's mouth, "Help me, please." But before Andy could react, Laura returned home. And the moment she saw Oliver outside, she snapped. She screamed at Andy, furious that he had taken Oliver out of his room without permission. Andy and Piper went back inside, both shaken and confused. Still tense, Andy suddenly remembered the piece of paper Oliver had written on. He grabbed it, hoping for a clue, and there it was. One word, scribbled in shaky handwriting, "Bird." Meanwhile, Laura carried Oliver, still unconscious, into her bedroom. There, she played a strange video showing bizarre magical rituals. The moment it started, Oliver jolted awake, his eyes filled with terror as he asked, trembling, "What are you doing to me?" Then he began to scream a raw, panicked cry, like his soul was breaking apart. That same day, Laura took Piper outside to play in the rain. She acted cheerful and carefree, like she was reliving old memories with her dead daughter Kathy. But after a few minutes, she led Piper to the garden shed. Inside the shed, Laura handed Piper an old jacket and said with a faint, almost broken smile, this was Kathy's favorite. She looked at Piper with strange tenderness, then softly added, "If you'd like, you can call me Mom." Piper looked confused but replied politely, "I'll try." Then Laura said there was something else she wanted to show her. She gently took Piper's hand and placed it on Kathy's frozen body inside the freezer. Startled, Piper asked, "What is this?" Laura smiled, calm and eerie, and whispered, "I'll tell you when the time is right." That night, Laura sat with Oliver again, watching the same strange ritual video. But this time, everything became clear. The true purpose behind everything she had done was finally revealed. Laura wanted to bring Kathy back to life. That night, Laura sprayed herself with Andy's cologne, then quietly slipped into Piper's room while she slept. Without warning, she struck Piper hard in the eye, waking her with a scream of pain. But Andy heard nothing. He was still knocked out, under the effects of the sedatives Laura had been secretly giving him. The next morning, Andy noticed a dark bruise around Piper's eye. Alarmed, he asked who hurt her, but before Piper could answer, Laura cut in. She accused Andy of losing control, said he had become violent, and even claimed he attacked her too. Andy, desperate, begged Piper to believe him. He swore he hadn't touched her, but Piper, still shaken, said she was sure, because she smelled his cologne in her room right after the attack. That's when it hit Andy. Something was seriously wrong, and all the signs pointed to Laura. Andy had made up his mind. He needed to talk to Wendy, the social worker handling their case. He went to her office and waited outside. While standing there, something caught his eye. A missing child poster on the wall. He stepped closer and froze. The child in the photo was Oliver, but the name beneath it wasn't Oliver. It was Connor Bird. At the same time, Laura took Piper to practice goalball, a sport for the visually impaired, even though Piper was still hesitant. Meanwhile, Andy finally met with Wendy, ready to tell her everything. But before he could even begin, Wendy dropped a bombshell. Laura had already filed a report against him, accusing him of being violent, wetting himself, using drugs, and mistreating both her and his sister. He told Wendy something was seriously wrong, and revealed the truth. The boy living with Laura, Oliver, was actually a missing child named Connor Bird. Wendy was shocked, but quickly defended Laura. Meanwhile, back at the house, Laura returned, only to find everything in chaos. The place had been torn apart, completely destroyed by Oliver. As she stepped inside, Oliver slowly approached her, his eyes glowing with something deeply unnatural. Then, without warning, he lunged and bit into her arm, tearing off a chunk of flesh with shocking violence. Laura screamed in agony and ran, slamming a door behind her. Trying to regain control, she wrapped her wounded hand and drew a strange symbol on the window. Almost instantly, Oliver calmed down. Then came the next phase of the ritual, consumption of the body. In one of the most horrifying acts so far, Laura allowed Oliver, now fully possessed by the demon, to feed on Kathy's corpse as part of the resurrection ritual. Meanwhile, Andy was still with Wendy, desperately trying to make her see the truth. He told her how Laura kept calling the boy Oliver, but Wendy looked confused. She explained that the real Oliver, Laura's nephew, had red hair, which meant the boy living in the house wasn't Oliver at all. Now suspicious, Wendy finally agreed to go with Andy to the house. On the way, Andy pulled out his phone and recorded a voice message for Piper. His voice trembled as he said, "Oliver is a kidnapped child. I'm coming with Wendy. We'll be there soon." But Andy didn't know. Piper had left her phone at home. Laura heard the message instead, and the moment she realized Wendy was on her way, she panicked. Frantic, she raced through the house, cleaning up and covering any trace of what she'd done. When Wendy arrived at Laura's house, she turned to Andy and said firmly, "Stay in the car." Then she walked to the front door alone. Laura answered, calm, almost too calm. Wendy kept a serious tone. Andy raised concerns about child abuse. "I need to search the house." Laura smiled, cold and artificial, and let her in, pretending everything was normal. But outside, Andy had already slipped out of the car. He crept toward the locked garden shed, grabbed a bird feeder bowl, and smashed the padlock. With trembling hands, he opened the door, unsure of what he'd find. And what he saw was horrifying. Oliver was inside, sitting in the dark, hunched over a lifeless body, devouring it. Inside the house, Wendy continued her inspection. She showed Laura a photo of the missing boy, Connor Bird. "Have you seen this child?" she asked. Laura said no, but Wendy noticed her hand was bleeding. Before she could ask more, a blood-curdling scream rang out. "Andy." Wendy turned, alarmed. Laura looked at her and said coldly, "I can bring Kathy back to life." Wendy ran outside, and what she saw confirmed everything. A mutilated corpse lay on the ground, and a child, no longer human, was tearing into it with his teeth. Horrified, Wendy turned to run, but suddenly Laura came speeding in her car and ran her down, killing her instantly. Andy was still alive, but Laura grabbed his head and forced it into a pool of water, drowning him. And just like that, as if nothing had happened, Laura picked Piper up from goalball practice and calmly brought her home. Everything felt too normal. But soon after, Piper heard something upstairs, a voice that sounded like Andy. Heart racing, she followed the sound, creeping through the hallway, reaching out in the dark until her hand touched someone. Suddenly, Laura appeared, her voice sharp. "What are you doing up here?" Piper hesitated. "I thought I heard Andy," but Laura cut her off coldly. "That was just Oliver. Andy's not here." But something felt wrong. Piper remembered Laura lying before, about Oliver's hair color. Fear took over. She turned and ran, locking herself inside a room, her heart pounding. Inside the room, Piper tripped over something on the floor. She reached out and realized it was Andy's body. She recognized him by the metal retainer on his teeth. Suddenly the door opened. Laura walked in with a spare key. She told Piper everything was nearly ready, that she was about to complete the final step to bring Kathy back. Piper tried to run, but hit her head on something and collapsed, unconscious. Laura didn't waste a second. She dragged Piper's limp body to the backyard pool, now filled with cold rainwater. Oliver was already there, standing still at the edge. His stomach was unnaturally bloated, his face blank and distant, like he was waiting. Then, Laura began to drown Piper, Piper thrashed and struggled underwater, her strength fading fast, and just as she was about to give up, she whispered one word. Laura froze. That one word, Mom, pulled her back to the day Kathy drowned. For a brief moment she hesitated, and it was enough. Piper broke free and gasped for air, but Oliver was still watching, and he wasn't done. He lunged at Piper, attacking with sudden force. She fought back, using everything she had, and struck him hard in the stomach. Oliver doubled over, then vomited violently, as if his body was rejecting the last remains of Kathy. Piper didn't stop. She ran, sprinting toward the street, desperate for help. As Oliver tried to recover, his eyes landed on a missing child poster, showing his real face and real name, Connor Bird. Something shifted inside him, like a part of his lost humanity came back. Without realizing it, he stepped past the white line around the house, and in that moment, the demonic barrier broke. Moments later, the police arrived and found him. When an officer asked his name, he said, "My name is Connor Bird." At that same moment, Laura had lost everything. Broken and consumed by grief, she dragged Kathy's decayed body into the pool, holding it close as she sobbed, a mix of sorrow, madness, and desperation, while the police closed in from all sides, ready to end the nightmare. Thanks for watching, and if you're still here, make sure to like, subscribe, and stick around. The movies are far from over. See you in the next one.